Hi, my name is Stephen Harrison. All semester I've been taking a class on social problems in the global context. Sociology 202 with Dr. Seals at University of North Carolina at Greensboro has given me a good idea of what global social problems we face in our current system. Today I'm going to be looking at war and terror and its social global implications. We start with the Democratic Republic of Congo and its mineral conflict. Military groups, military rebels, are fighting for the mineral-rich East. The Democratic Republic of Congo has a lot of minerals in its East region, and this M23 movement is fighting for control in order to establish governmental gains. This is part of a continuing strife decade after the end of the war in Democratic Republic of Congo. M23 and Democratic Republic of Congo armed conflict displaces many civilians and causes logistical problems as well, including lack of education. Next, we're looking at Syria's civil war. The Syria civil war began after a violent shutdown of the Arab Spring protests in 2010. The regime is largely regarded, the governmental regime in power in Syria is largely regarded by such forces, imperial forces as the United States, as being an oppressive regime. Rebel groups are being funded by the United States in order to upset the power structure and overthrow what the United States at least sees as an oppressive regime. Peaceful people in Syria are facing war-torn lives due to this conflict. Syria is in an area of high civil strife, but Syria historically has been a fairly peaceful country that's looking at civil war now after the protests were stopped very violently by the government in power. Another study I looked at this semester in the class is Israel and the Palestinian conflict. This conflict resulted from Palestinians being displaced after the creation of the State of Israel by the UN. The West Bank and the Gaza Strip were established as Palestinian territories. But now we're seeing problems arise when Israeli government has not allowed Palestinians to move between the territories or outside of the territories and has limited their rights as citizens. This opens the door for human rights violations and also leads to displaced Palestinians protesting the conditions and the treatment. Israel has even recently began building establishments on the Palestinian territories of West Bank and the Gaza Strip that were set aside for them years ago. A little later in the semester, I looked at a developing story, the developing North Korean nuclear threats that arose. The leader Kim Jong-un is a new leader and threatened South Korea with strike. This was in retaliation for what he saw as a problem arising from South Korea and United States joint military operations in the region of the Korean Peninsula. South Korea has a pact with the United States that has recently been expanded to include any nuclear or any military action by North Korea on South Korea within their border. South Koreans wanted to avoid conflict and sought to lessen the situation as much as possible. Some experts regard this as an effort to prop up the new leader and support his regime. There's a high chance of global nuclear involvement if the new leader of North Korea decided to act on any of his threats, because the United States would get involved, thus bringing certain powers such as Russia involved, and China has also spoken out against the new North Korea's actions because they would be affected as well from a nuclear strike, being that they're in the fallout zone. Now that we've covered some of the conflicts going on around the world that I've looked at this semester, we need to look at the causes of the problem as well. The causes of the problem are many. Certain ones that I've identified as most important are enemy or social disconnectedness, a feeling of social disconnectedness that people feel resulting from corrupt governments. In the example of Syria, we see social disconnectedness and protests arising from oppressive regime and their inability to listen to the problems and fix the issues of the people. Globalization also results in clash of cultures. This clash of cultures leads to people who normally would not otherwise have any kind of contact having contact. This brings cultural viewpoints and ideology involved on a business sense where it normally wouldn't be incorporated. Global economic weaknesses has also led people to clamor for scarce resources. As we see in the example of DR Congo, scarce resources are being mined in the region in order to help the rebel groups economically. Competing theories of government also can't be ignored in this as cause of a problem. We have, as we see in the example of North Korea, we see communist and capitalist ideologies fighting here. These are two separate systems of public policy, and they don't coexist very well. This leads to increased problems on a global scale. Now let's look at some of the implications of these problems. We have a lack of cooperation to solve collective issues through the global problems that we see. This lack of our world as a whole has resource scarcity, and we're also facing the problem of environmental concerns increasing every day. We need to work together and ignore our political and governmental strife to solve collective issues that affect us all. Another implication of these problems are less education in warring states. When states are at war or under conflict, such as the Democratic Republic of Congo or Syria or North Korea, they have less resources to devote to education, which we all know education is important to increasing the productivity of a population, as well as education of women in order to control the population and not overuse our Earth's resources. There's also a decreased access to health care because health care can't be seen as a very important issue whenever states have to worry about revolts within their own country. Also, one of the major implications to consider involved in these global problems of war and terror are human rights violations. Human rights are never considered when groups are fighting. It's only the end goal that's in mind here. The human rights violations can't be ignored, and we should really focus on increasing our global awareness in order to decrease human rights violations. So there you have it. Now that we've seen the causes of the problems themselves, and the implications that arise, we might can have some of the tools needed in order for us to effectively solve these problems for a better future for us all. Thank you for listening, and I hope you learned something, because I know I did.